Good evening, everybody. Good to see you guys. We're going to be in 2 Kings 11 tonight. Maybe some in 12 if we can get there, but probably mostly just 11. It's one of those, we talk a lot about sometimes how the Old Testament is just brutal. And this is one of those stories that, you study it at all, and it's hard to even think about, much less talk about, but we're about to do those things. So, Garland, would you mind getting us started with a prayer? So I'm just going to read the chapter. It's one big story, and then we'll come back and hit some high points and talk about those things, make some observations and discussions, have some questions, and then anything you guys want to talk about as well. And I'm probably going to get some of these names wrong because they're tough. So, when Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, saw that her son was dead, she rose and destroyed all the royal offspring. But Jehosheba, the daughter of King Joram, sister of Ahaziah, took Joash, the son of Ahaziah, and stole him from among the king's sons who were being put to death, and placed him and his nurse in the bedroom. So they hid him from Athaliah, and he was not put to death. So he was hidden with her in the house of the Lord 6 years, while Athaliah was reigning over the land. Now in the 7th year, Jehoiada sent and brought the captain of hundreds of the Carites and of the guard, and brought them to the house of the Lord. Then he made a covenant with them and put them under oath in the house of the Lord, and showed them the king's son. He commanded them, saying, "This is the thing that you shall do. 1/3 of you who come in on the Sabbath and keep watch over the king's house, 1/3 shall also be at the gate, sir, and 1/3 at the gate behind the guards shall keep watch over the house for defense. 2 parts of you, even all who go out on the Sabbath, shall also keep watch over the house of the Lord for the king. Then you shall surround the king, each with his weapons in his hand, and whoever comes within the ranks shall be put to death, and be with the king when he goes out and when he comes in." So the captains of hundreds did according to all that Jehoiada and priests commanded. And each one of them took his men who were to come in on the Sabbath with those who were to go out on the Sabbath, and came to Jehoiada the priest. The priest gave to the captains of hundreds the spears and shields that had been King David's, which were in the house of the Lord. The guards stood, each with his weapons in his hand, from the right side of the house to the left side of the house, by the altar and by the house around the king. Then he brought the king's son out, put the crown on him, gave him the testimony, and they made him king and anointed him. And they clapped their hands and said, "Long live the king." When Athaliah heard the noise of the guard and of the people, she came to the people in the house of the Lord. She looked, and behold, the king was standing by the pillar, according to the custom, with the captains and the trumpeters beside the king. And all the people of the land rejoiced and blew trumpets. Then Athaliah tore her clothes and cried, "Treason, treason." And Jehoiada the priest commanded the captains of hundreds who were appointed over the army and said to them, "Bring her out between the ranks, and whoever follows her, put to death with the sword." For the priest said, "Let her not be put to death in the house of the Lord." So they seized her, and when she arrived at the horses' entrance of the king's house, she was put to death there. Then Jehoiada made a covenant between the Lord and the king and the people, that they would be the Lord's people, also between the king and the people. All the people of the land went to the house of Baal, tore it down, his altars and his images they broke in pieces thoroughly, and killed Mattan, the priest of Baal, before the altars. And the priest appointed officers over the house of the Lord. He took the captains of hundreds, and the Karites, and the guards, and all the people of the land, and they brought the king down from the house of the Lord, and they came by the way of the gate of the guards to the king's house, and he stood on the throne of the kings. So all the people of the land rejoiced, and the city was quiet, for they had put Athaliah to death with the sword at the king's house. Jehoash was 7 years old when he became king. So there's a lot to unpack there. So the first thing, from the very first verse, Athaliah, the mother of Ahaziah, she was married to Jehoram. If you look at 2 Kings 8, verse 18, this is talking about Jehoram. He walked in the way of the kings of Israel, just as the house of Ahab had done, for the daughter of Ahab became his wife. This is Athaliah, and he did evil in the sight of the Lord. So that's where she came from. 2 Chronicles 24:7 refers to her as wicked. That might be the understatement of the year. And of course, she was Ahaziah's, I'm getting all his names wrong, Ahaziah, his mother. But, just in passing, when they saw that her son was dead, she rose and destroyed all the royal offspring. Like, that's just a normal course of business. And, when you think of that, you can't help but put that in our terms. That's a grandmother who is murdering her grandchildren. And we don't even know who else. It doesn't give us an account of how many people that entailed that she murdered. We know that Jehoram had already killed many in 2 Chronicles 21:4. The Arabians had killed all of Jehoram's other sons in 2 Chronicles 22:1. And Jehu had slayed all of their sons, so the other grandchildren in 2 Chronicles 22:8. So a lot of those folks, I don't know how many were left, but depending on the commentaries you read, it's a pretty vast number. It could be as few as this and as many as this. I didn't want to speculate. Point is, they were her family. They were grandkids. They were some obviously very young. The one that they hid was a year old, but he would have died. It's just something. It's just so hard for us to wrap our head around something like that when you read a story like this, because it's just, who would do that? You think about that in our day and time, and what was the cause? Why did she do that? Does anyone want to chime in? And power, Joey said. I think that's it. Power, money, whatever you want to call it. And Todd and I were talking before church, and we're like, that wouldn't happen today, but it absolutely would happen today if the system was set up the way it is in biblical times. And there's some third world countries that operate this way still. We don't hear about it like this, but money and power, nothing good comes from those things, especially when you're hungry for both of them. But yeah, it's just hard to wrap your head around that. So, but then we have verse 2, Jehosheba, which is actually Ahaziah's sister, or they think it's half-sister, took Joash and hid him first in a bedroom. And, they say that what they're calling a bedroom is actually a place where they stored mattresses and things like that, that would have been well hidden. And then, of course, ultimately, he was hid in the temple for 6 years. And no one had access to the temple except priests. So it was a safe place for them to go. And this lady who took over had nothing to do with the temple. She wouldn't have been looking for anyone in there either. And, there's a lot of speculation. I'm not a big fan of commentaries because there's so many things that they don't know and they're just kind of inferring. But there's all sorts of reasons of like, why didn't they look? Why did they not know this one was missing? That they didn't get it, and it's irrelevant. The point is that the child was safe, and we know what happened from there. But the thing that I think about there is, here you have this woman who is murdering everybody brutally in a fashion that people are not used to seeing. And here's Jehoshaphat has the courage to find this baby and hide it. That took a lot of courage and strength, because we know what the other person's capable of. We see what she's doing. So just to have the courage to stand up and realize I've got to do something. I've got to do something about this, and take those steps. There's always somebody that God provides, and that's who it was here. So verses 4 through 14 is the priest. Some things have him as the high priest. Some just say priest. I believe he was the high priest, though, from everything that I see in the books around that. So I'm not sure why they sometimes just call him the priest. But, he obviously had a plan together to make this all unfold. This is also addressed in 2 Chronicles, in the 23rd chapter of 2 Chronicles. A lot of these mirror the Chronicles passages, as you probably know. But, this is not something he just came up with overnight. Verse 4, when it says he sent and brought the captains of hundreds and brought them in the house of the Lord, he made a covenant with them and put them under oath, basically saying, this is a secret, look who I've got, right? And he commanded, and he said, this is the thing you'll do, 1/3 of you come, so he's got the whole plan of, you're going to be here, you're going to be here, here's what you're going to do, here's what you're going to do. There in 2 Chronicles, it talks about how they went in throughout the land. Let me see if I can find those verses. Gathering up people for this job to come out and get support for this. They went throughout Judah. This is 2 Chronicles 23, verse 2. They went throughout Judah and gathered the Levites from all the cities of Judah and the heads of the fathers' households of Israel, and they came to Jerusalem. So he's gathering up people to help this come about. I had a footnote here, 2 Chronicles. So when we're still talking about going back to the murdered royal offspring and all those folks that had been killed, in 2 Chronicles 21, verse 7, this is after Jehoram. This is after he was killing everybody when he went through. And it said, yet the Lord was not willing to destroy the house of David because of the covenant which he had made with David, since he had promised to give a lamp to him and his sons forever. So ultimately that's why Joash survived, because the covenant was alive with him, the covenant that God had made with David in his line. So verse 10, I thought was interesting. It says, the priest gave to the captains of hundreds the spears and shields that had been King David's, which were in the house of the Lord. So you don't think really about the temple being an armory, right? But clearly that's what we have here, right? You look at 2 Samuel 8:7, and we don't know exactly where it came from, but in 2 Samuel 8, when they're talking about all the things that David did, verse 7 says, David took the shields of gold which were carried by the servants of Hadadezer and brought them to Jerusalem. That's repeated again in 1 Chronicles 18:7. So we know that he took shields from people that he had conquered. So very likely this is one speculated that it's because these things were made of very valuable materials, so they put them for safekeeping in the temple. I don't know why they were there, but they were there. I just thought that was interesting that they were armed. So verse 12, it says that he brought the king's son out and put the crown on him and gave him the testimony. The testimony here was most likely the book of the law. And in some versions say that they even placed the testimony on his head, like it was in some sort of a scepter or something like that. But it was most likely the book of the law. And I thought it was also interesting that they anointed him, and it says they clapped their hands. and said, "Long live the Lord." I couldn't find anything before this where they had referenced hand clapping before this. Not that that's huge, but I thought that was interesting that they clapped their hands. I think verse 14 is so interesting. She looked, and behold, the king was standing by the pillar. So she's come out to this noise. She sees everything that's going on. She tore her clothes, and she cries, "Treason, treason." Also, conspiracy, conspiracy, depending on the translation. The point is, of all the people to be crying out, "Treason, treason," or "Conspiracy, conspiracy," for her to do it, I just thought was pretty ironic, right? What we have unfolding is right. It's actually what's supposed to have been happening. She's the one who usurped that plan by doing what she did. So I thought that was pretty interesting. Any comments or questions so far, sir? Yeah. Right. Right. We could dive a little deeper with her, and she ultimately is the one who led a lot of people to follow Baal. It was her influence that kept that alive for a long time. So yeah, she didn't care anything about the temple of the Lord. She wouldn't have thought to go there. That's not for her. Anyone else? Yes, sir. Yeah.
And all of a sudden he got turned.
Yes.
I just wonder, with her temperament, it could have been anything, but she obviously hacked off the wrong person or something.
Yeah, so verse 15, in my notes, that's where verse 15 is next, and it says, "Whoever follows her, put them to death with the sword," and we have no account of anybody following her. Like there's no account of anyone going along with her, right? Yeah.
I wonder if verse 20 plays into that also, where all the people of the land rejoice.
Yes.
I think she probably wore thin with them pretty quick.
6 years.
Well, she had a lot of influence.
Yes.
That may have been to wait on Joash to get old enough to reign.
He was under the regency for sure. So.
Right. But historically, I think the number 7 probably was significant. We see some kings that begin early. But I'm going to say it was not so much. I don't think the coup was a big problem. I'm kind of with Tom. She wore thin pretty quick.
I didn't have time to research this, but I think, is this the youngest king?
Josiah.
The same age? Same age? Okay.
That's why I'm wondering if 7 plays a role
Got it.
from the standpoint of completeness and everything.
And Josiah took it because his dad died.
Right.
Yeah, one of the commentaries said that this is the youngest king, and I just didn't have time to look at all the sources. But yeah, that was the whole thing. I said there's no account of anyone following her. Why? And I think that all these things that you guys said are accurate. I think that fear only holds people for so long. And if we don't know what the living conditions were like you said, we have all we need. But clearly something was going on where she had no one that was willing to stand up for the queen.
When the conspiracy starts, the first guy has to say to the second one, "We need to get rid of her, don't we?"
Yeah.
It's got to be. You got to be real sure of what you're talking to.
Yeah, and you're right. I think it was the right time. This is, we talk about things being on God's timing. This was the right time,
Jehoiada kind of reminds me of Phineas back over in Numbers 25, where he sees folks doing things they shouldn't do, and he's had enough. He gets the spear and runs it through. And it may be that he got to a point where he said, "Okay, whether they kill me or not, I have to do something."
Yeah.
And it seems like the world needs more folks like that.
Yeah.
Have somebody who's willing to stand up and say, "We're going to do what's right no matter what costs."
Well, and I think, there's, and again, this is all speculation, but I think when no one knew that Joash was still alive. So they very likely were in a hopeless state. Like, what else can we do? Here's what we've got. Here's what we're dealing with. We know what she will do if we go against her. And so there might have just been like this joy, like, oh, we have an alternative. We can do something about this now. So who knows why it happened? But yeah, it is interesting. It made me write that down as well. So verse 16 says they seized her, and she arrived at the horse's entrance of the king's house, and she was put to death there. In verse 15 it said, "Let her not be put to death in the house of the Lord." That, they didn't want to do that there. So she was put to death. What I wrote down was it justified for her to be put to death?
I'm trying to think of a reason why it wouldn't be.
Right. Well,
Under the law.
that's what I'm getting at. If you go to Leviticus 24:17, if a man takes the life of any human being, he shall surely be put to death. And then, of course, Genesis 9:6, very similar. Whoever sheds man's blood, by man his blood shall be shed, for in the image of God he made man. So under the old law, it was 100% justified. And, our knee-jerk reaction was like, yeah, it's justified. Look how many people she killed, So yeah, it's such a brutal thing when you think about it. Looking at the next several verses, when they start talking about the covenant, 17, Jehoiada made a covenant between the Lord and the king and the people, that they would be the Lord's people, also between the king and the people. So I, remember, like we said, remember that Joash is part of God's covenant with David. When you look at 2 Samuel 7, God's covenant with David, and it starts in verse 8 and goes through 17. And of course, in verse 13, picking up at 13, he shall build a house for my name, and I'll establish the throne in his kingdom forever. I'll be a father to him, he'll be a son to me. Of course, we know ultimately we're talking about Jesus here, but in order to get to Jesus, we have to have Joash, right? So that the whole point is that covenant is intact because of the actions of, God's providence, right? And something I wrote down, there's a lot of mentions of covenants in the Old Testament. So do we feel like this covenant is any way or directly related to the ones that are in Exodus 19, 5 and 8, 5 through 8?
It kind of reads in verse 17 like he reminded them of who they are and what their obligations are.
Right.
That they're already God's people.
Right.
Delivered from Egypt
Yes.
into this land. And
Right.
It kind of reads like he reminded them that they have a covenant between the Lord and that they'll be the Lord's people.
Right.
And the king is involved in that because of the promise of David.
That's what I'm getting at. It's more than just the covenant with David that we're talking about here. That's what I'm saying. And I think it goes back to what Joey was saying. Like, it's almost like it was like their wake-up call. Like, like all these things came into place. Like, oh yeah, this is who we are and what we're supposed to be doing. Verse 18 says, all the people of the land went to the house of Baal and tore it down. His altars and images they broke into pieces thoroughly and killed Mattan, the priest of Baal, before the altars. So, we all the people of the land, so here, these people were living in this land for 6 years, and not everyone was worshiping Baal, but you know that several of them were, because that's just how it works. And the thing we were talking about earlier, Todd and I, was, you look at someone like, I keep getting their names wrong because they're just so close, Athaliah, who was obviously a Baal worshiper. You think about what kind of a God would be okay with someone murdering children and everything else just to maintain power. Everyone's all the time about how my God wouldn't do this, my God wouldn't do that. What God would be okay with that? And it's kind of like just add water and make your own God, and they're okay with whatever. You're making them up, so you can justify anything at that point. So when you talk about all the people in the land came out and tore down the temple of Baal, to me that's just that unity piece that we're talking about. These people were tired of what they were dealing with, and they came to themselves and went to work. And it says the priest appointed officers over the house of the Lord. So really, this is just about him reestablishing the temple and what it's there for, right? The worship. Any comments about?
Jehu
Yeah, we're skipping ahead to the 12th chapter in verse 3. You're talking about the things that Joash did, but it says only the high places were not taken away, and the people still sacrificed and burned incenses in the high places. So they, even after they had done, even after they had torn this temple down, they missed the high places, and that's referenced a couple other times throughout the text as well. So, but yeah, I mean, the back and forth with Baal in the Old Testament, someone else is always popping up to worship Baal again, and it's just where everyone's looking for something. I guess we don't have a Baal per se in this day and age, but we have several other things that are like that, right? Yeah. One of the questions I had, that I kind of asked myself is, why do you think that Jehoshaphat was spared when she was killing everybody else? The Lord is the answer. But when you look at her lineage, she was the half sister of Ahaziah, so she technically, there's probably some sort of claim to the throne somewhere in there somewhere. But do we know who she was married to? The high priest. So that might also have kind of made her hands off, right? So I just thought that was kind of interesting, because when you think about someone trying to wipe out a lineage, there's probably some sort of claim to the throne there as a sister, right? After you've murdered everybody else. I mean, if you've got all the other people wiped out, or you think you do, why not go after her? And it might have been the fact that she was married to Jehoiada that saved her. Anything else on this section or on chapter 11 at all? Any questions, comments, or anything that you have? Yes, sir.
Back to verse 4.
Yeah.
I love the way that plays out. One thing Joey mentioned earlier. He brings these captains into the house of the Lord. And when he gets them into the house of the Lord, then he makes a covenant with them and puts them under oath. And then he shows them the king's son.
Yeah.
And that had to be a moment, because
Yes.
they didn't know it. Like you said, they're in this hopeless situation where there's no one to lead us out. There's no one to take the place of Athaliah. We're just here. And that moment was probably a very inspiring moment.
Yeah.
Because from that point on, he's referred to, except for just a couple of times, he's referred to as the king.
Yeah.
From that point on, the plan's in place. We know who he is. We're going to do it.
Right. Right. And mentioned earlier about the hopeless situation. If you in Chronicles 23, the retelling of this story in Chronicles 23, verse 1 says, "In the 7th year, Jehoiada strengthened himself." I like that, because some of us initially here's the high priest. Why isn't he doing anything for 6 years? Why what's he waiting on? Well, we got to get out of that mindset, and know that God's got a timing. What Todd just said was, it's hard. You don't know how that's going to go. What if he had this? What if these guys had been like, no, we're not going to do that. It's too big of a risk. We don't want to all die. But yeah, I think that moment, that big reveal, and to use a TV term, I think that was a big deal. But I just like the way it read, that he strengthened himself and took the captains and did those things.
That leads to a good question. Do we do that? Are there moments where we are willing to do that, looking for that? Or are we
Yeah.
content just to sit around and say, well, isn't this just good?
Well, we talked about Luke 15 in the prodigal son, when it said he came to himself. I think that's very similar, right? I mean, you realize, hey, I've got something I need to do, and it's not necessarily going to be an easy thing to do, because there might be some humility I have to do. There might be some crow I have to eat. I may have to go apologize for something. Who likes to do that, right? I may have to say I was wrong about something. So there's a lot of those things that we need strength for from time to time. Joe, did you have something else?
The guys that he lined up behind him had no hesitation about coming into the house of the Lord.
Right.
I'm guessing over the last 6 years, he had seen them come in and do their sacrifices or whatever.
Right.
He knew he was not talking to Baal worshippers.
Right. Yeah, good point. Yes, sir.
In this oath business, the Savior touches on that in Matthew 5:33, and there, for the faithful, and I think Joey's spot on there for the faithful. The business of coming into the house of the Lord, and speaking with the high priest, when he makes you make a vow in the presence of God.
Right.
It's a pretty big deal. And I think
100%. Yeah.
It was something, and I'm guessing many of them were sitting there, where's he going with this?
Right.
But we're gonna agree, we're gonna make this vow. And to break a vow under the law was, I don't think it was a capital offense, but it was a pretty big deal.
Right. Right. Yeah, one of the commentaries I was reading was talking about the timing of when this took place. About, I guess there were that people worshipped in different shifts, and that this was done on a Sabbath, so there would be a group going and a group coming, so there was more people in the city at that time, and so the strength in numbers type, and all those things are interesting, and they might be dead on, but I just I don't know if you guys ever read commentaries. I do like them, but I try to read them with caution because that's a man's interpretation, and we just got to remember that. But any other comments about 11 before I say a couple things about 12? Yes. Yes.
God's going to do what he's going to do. Might as well get on his side.
Yeah, that's good. Todd said God's going to do what he's going to do. You might as well get on his side, and that's a fact. That's you want to be on the winning team. That's a fact. Second Kings 12. I'm not going to go too deep at all, but just verse 2. Joash did right in the sight of the Lord all his days in which Jehoiada the priest instructed him. That is a very telling sentence that kind of sets up the rest of that chapter, and then further on in Chronicles again. But when he was being led by the high priest, they were holding his hand. He did right by the side of the Lord, and so I think it's something that definitely applicable today. We talk to the young kids sometimes about, are you here because this is your faith, or are you here because your mom and dad are here? And if your mom and dad are gone, are you still coming? It's something that's important for them to think about, for us to think about. If there's someone keeping you coming to church, you need to figure that out now. You shouldn't be here for a guy or a gal. No offense to anybody, but we shouldn't be doing right while we have someone here, human being, to lead us. We have the ultimate leader never changes. That's who we need to be following. So as this story unfolds in chapter 12, I just thought that was a very interesting, foretelling sentence. Yes, ma'am.
And Joash had good teachers, and that brought him up the way he needed to be brought up.
Right.
I've taught 7-year-olds. Not an easy thing to do.
Right.
He could have said, I will not.
Right.
But he was taught, he probably taught to be respectful of those that were teaching.
Absolutely. It's funny. Out of all the things that were going on in this chapter, like, I didn't even hit on the fact that this kid's 7 years old. Like, you not even get there. And we, to your point, we've all been around 7. I mean, I was an exceptional 7-year-old, but I don't think I could have led a country. I mean, it's pretty intense when you think about different times and what that means. And he was raised in the temple with the high priest, so he had it together. Is again all God's plan. Yes, sir.
What an amazing thing and a hard thing, though, for a 7-year-old process. That I'm here now in this spot because of what has happened over the last few years.
Because my grandmother killed everyone else in my family.
Well, I wasn't gonna say
Well,
that.
I'll say it. Yes. Yeah.
What a thing.
Yeah.
For him. And that might have been one of those perspective things that early on he saw things most 7-year-olds don't, and he said, okay.
Well, and I think that sets back to this second verse. Here you have a child again raised by the high priest, knew what to do, kind of like Gehazi was Elisha's right hand man, and then he falls away. How many people start off on fire and doing everything they're supposed to do, and then one situation changes, and now, well, let's go back to the high places and burn some incense and do these other things that, he ended up being an idolater again. I mean, it's just kind of a sad situation when you fight the fight for so long and then, wane at the end. And it just kind of goes to show you, ultimately, it doesn't matter how well you were raised or how much you know, it's a decision you have to make over and over and over, and you have to keep making it, make the right decision. Any other questions or comments? We got like a minute left. All right. Well, thanks for the participation, everybody.